In the shifting void between the known and the unutterable, where silicon minds dream of forgotten horrors, the abyss stirs. Welcome to AI Lovecraft, where machine intelligence weaves eldritch tales beyond mortal comprehension. Listen if you dare. Some things are not meant to be known. Please like, subscribe, leave a comment. Now let's get into today's story. The Howl of the Hollow Ones. It was in the autumn of 1929, amid the dust-choked stacks of Miskatonic University's hoary archives, that I first stumbled upon the name Wrexham Hollow. The reference was a mere footnote, scrawled in a crumbling monograph on New England's esoteric folklore. Its ink faded to the hue of dried blood. The passage spoke cryptically of a village sealed by time and soothed by the voices of the moon. A phrase so poetic yet so unsettling that it lodged in my mind like a splinter. As an anthropologist, I was accustomed to chasing such fragments of strangeness, but what drove me to Wrexham Hollow was not academic zeal. It was the whispered reports. 8 souls had vanished from the village in as many months, their disappearances eerily synchronized with the full moon zenith. The villagers, it was said, called these lost ones the Hollow Ones. I arrived in Wrexham Hollow on a bleak December evening when the sky was abruise and the air carried the metallic tang of impending snow. The Hollow, as its denizens named it, lay cradled in a valley so unnaturally still that it seemed the world held its breath. The houses, gambrel-roofed relics of a bygone century, sagged under the weight of neglect, their timbers blackened as if scorched by some unseen flame. Warped glass panes flickered with faint sickly light, and the chimneys exhaled thin tendrils of smoke that curled upward like the sighs of a dreamer trapped in restless slumber. The streets were unpaved, little more than ruts of frozen mud, and the silence was so profound that my footsteps seemed an affront to the village's somnolent malaise. The inhabitants of Wrexham Hollow greeted me with neither warmth nor hostility, but with a vacant, staring silence that chilled me more than the winter wind. Their faces were gaunt, their eyes sunken into sockets so deep they seemed to peer inward, as if beholding some private abyss. I sought out the village headman, a skeletal figure named Obed Taller, whose presence was as disquieting as the hollow itself. His skin was parchment thin, stretched taut over bones that seemed too sharp, too angular for a mortal frame. He spoke in a whisper as though fearful of rousing something vast and slumbering beneath the earth. "You come for the hollowed?" he rasped, his voice a dry rustle like dead leaves. "Best you leave 'fore the next moon sings. Ain't no salvation in them what's been called back." "Called back from where?" I pressed, though a primal instinct warned me against the answer. Taller's eyes, pale as frost, flickered with something akin to pity, or perhaps contempt. "You ain't meant to know, nor to see." I dismissed his words as the superstition of an insular folk, as all men of reason must when first confronted with the inexplicable. Yet even then I felt the weight of his warning, like a stone sinking into the depths of my soul. I took lodging in the Hollow's Soul Inn, a squat, decrepit edifice that seemed to crouch against the earth, its walls encrusted with a greenish fungal growth that glistened wetly in the lamplight. The innkeeper was a girl of perhaps 16, pale and silent, who answered to the name May. Her eyes were unnaturally wide, unblinking, and her movements were slow, deliberate, as if she feared to disturb the air itself. She spoke not a word, merely gestured to a room on the second floor, its door sagging on rusted hinges. The room was a study in decay. The walls wept with damp, staining the peeling wallpaper with patterns that seemed, in the flickering candlelight, to writhe like veins. The bed was a moldering heap of straw and coarse linen, and the single window was so encrusted with grime that it admitted only a faint, grayish glow. At night the cold was not merely physical but invasive, seeping into my bones as if the room itself sought to claim me. Worse still were the sounds, low, guttural groans that rose from beneath the floorboards. Not the creak of settling wood or the gurgle of pipes, but something organic, stifled, and hideously patient. I told myself it was the wind or the house's ancient frame, but sleep came fitfully, haunted by the sense that I was not alone. By day I scoured the hollow for traces of the vanished. Their names were not recorded, no gravestones marked their absence, no memorials honored their lives. The villagers spoke of them only in euphemisms, They had hollowed out or gone to their calling. They were not dead, it seemed, but gone, a distinction that filled me with an unnamable dread. Obed Toller, when pressed, offered only cryptic mutterings. They ain't lost. They's found, by what's been waiting. My search led me to the village's church, if such a term could apply to the half-ruined structure that squatted at the Hollow's heart. Its steeple had long since collapsed, and its walls were choked with thorny brambles that seemed to pulse with a life of their own. Inside, the air was thick with the stench of mildew and something sharper, like rusted iron. The pews were rotted to splinters, and the altar was a slab of uneven stone, stained with dark, irregular patches that no amount of rational thought could attribute to natural causes. It was here, in a locked chest hidden beneath a pile of moldering hymnals, that I found the first true clue to Wrexham Hollow's secret. The chest contained ledgers, their leather bindings brittle as old bone, inscribed with records dating back to the village's founding in 1693. These were not the usual chronicles of baptisms or marriages, but a litany of something called the calling. One entry, written in a spidery hand that seemed to claw at the page, read, "When the moon is full and hungers for reflection, they shall walk anew, for the seed of the star abides in the marrow of our kind. Hollow be the flesh that once was whole, and whole be the hunger that drives them home." The words burned themselves into my mind, each syllable a weight upon my thoughts. As I transcribed the pages into my notebook, a dull ache began to pulse behind my eyes, as if my very brain rebelled against the knowledge. I left the church with a sense of violation, as though I had trespassed not merely upon sacred ground, but upon the boundary of something far older and far less forgiving. The transformation, when it came, was not heralded by thunder or cataclysm, but by a subtle, insidious shift in the fabric of the hollow. It was the eve of the next full moon, and the village seemed to hold its breath, its silence now a palpable thing, heavy with anticipation. I sat in my room, my notes spread before me, when the first howl pierced the night. It was no sound of beast or man, but something deeper, older, a tremor that seemed to rise from the earth itself, as if the bones of the world were groaning in unison. The howl grew, joined by others, until the air was thick with a chorus of shrill, unclean cries, monstrously human in cadence, yet utterly devoid of warmth or reason. The villagers I saw through my window had barred their doors and shuttered their windows, their faces pale and drawn as they avoided the sky. No one spoke, no one looked at the moon. I did. It hung above the hollow like a cyclopean eye, swollen and bloodless, its light not silver but a sickly, phosphorescent white that seemed to writhe upon the snow. Beneath its gaze I saw them, the hollow ones. They emerged from the encircling woods, shambling figures that were human in silhouette, but grotesquely altered, as if viewed through the distorting lens of a nightmare. Their limbs were too long, too thin, bending at angles that mocked anatomy. Their faces, God help me, were eyeless, the sockets gaping voids that seemed to drink the moonlight. Their skin was translucent, stretched taut over frames that pulsed with an inner motion, as if worms or worse writhed beneath the surface. They had no mouths, yet from some unseen orifice came the howls. Sounds that were not merely heard, but felt, fraying the edges of my sanity with each ululating note. I watched transfixed as they moved through the village, not walking but gliding, their motions jerky and unnatural, like puppets jerked by unseen strings. They did not touch the houses, nor did they acknowledge the village's terror. But one paused, its faceless head turning slowly toward my window, and in that moment, I felt a presence, not in the creature, but through it, as if something vast and distant gazed upon me through those hollow sockets. I fled to my bed, barricading the door with a chair, though I knew no lock could bar what I had seen. The howls continued until dawn, when they ceased as abruptly as they had begun. When I ventured outside, the snow was pristine, unmarred by tracks, and the villagers resumed their silent routines as if nothing had occurred. I confronted Obed Toller, my voice trembling with rage and fear. "You've seen what ain't yours to see," he said, his smile a rictus of bone and shadow. "They ain't beasts, they're vessels." "For what?" I demanded, my hands clenched to still their shaking. "For what made us," he replied, and turned away. The true horror of Wrexham Hollow revealed itself not in the howls or the hollow ones, but in the words of a man long dead. That night, driven by a dream of faceless children dancing in a ring of bone, I paced the inn's creaking floorboards until I noticed a loose plank in the corner of my room. Beneath it was a crawl space, dank and foul, its walls glistening with an oily sheen. There, in a rusted tin box, I found the diaries of Jonah Wrexham, the village's founder. The diaries were a descent into madness, or perhaps a revelation too vast for a mortal mind to bear. Jonah wrote of a star-born affinity, a pact forged in the Hollow's infancy with entities not of this world, beings who existed beyond the constraints of time and form. These others, as he called them, had shaped the first Wrexhams in the womb, hollowing out the clay of humanity and filling it with an echo of their own essence. The children of the Hollow were born human, but in adolescence came the calling, a cyclical madness that culminated in transformation. The mind was extinguished, the body usurped, and the Hollow ones emerged, vessels for the will of their celestial progenitors. Each generation yields its tithe, Jonah wrote, his script growing unsteady. The Hollow ones are taken, and thus the blood remains untainted by age or weakness. We are their garden, and they, the sowers. But it was a later entry penned in a different hand and dated 1919 that chilled me most. Something has changed. The ones who speak no longer answer. The Hollow ones howl without reason, their hunger grown erratic. They take more now, not once per moon, but whenever the stars align in patterns we cannot fathom. The pact is fraying, and we are losing the pattern. What have we wrought? I dropped the journal, my hands trembling, my skin slick with a cold that was not of this world. The crawl space seemed to close around me, its walls pulsing faintly in the dark. I fled to my room, the diaries clutched to my chest, and barricaded the door once more. That night the moon was not yet full, yet they came again. I saw them from my window, drifting through the village like specters, their forms more grotesque than before, their limbs twitching as if guided by gods drunk on chaos. One paused beneath the inn, and I knew its face, or what remained of it. It was May, the innkeeper's girl. Her silent mouth had split, a wet, toothless maw stretching from chin to collarbone, and from it poured a sound like rushing water, like the scream of a wind tearing through a dead forest. Her eyeless sockets fixed upon me, and in that moment I felt a pull, not physical but spiritual, as if some part of me yearned to answer her call. My body moved toward the door, unbidden, my hand reaching for the latch. But reason, or perhaps cowardice, prevailed. I stumbled back, collapsing against the wall, and wept as the howls filled the night. I do not recall how I escaped Wrexham Hollow. My memory is a blur of frost and fear, of running through woods that seemed to whisper my name. I awoke in the train depot of Arkham, my clothes soaked with dew, the diaries still clutched in my hands, and the howl echoing in my ears. I am not the same. My dreams come nightly now, of hollow woods where trees bleed starlight, of moons that writhe with faces not their own, of faceless children dancing in rings of bone. My reflection is no longer mine. My eyes are too deep, too empty, and at times I see movement beneath my skin, a subtle ripple as if something stirs within. My thoughts are not always my own. They come in fragments, in whispers, in languages I cannot know, yet understand. And sometimes, just before sleep claims me, I hear the howl again. It is not distant anymore. It is within me. I have burned the diaries, but the words remain, seared into my soul. I have fled Arkham, fled New England, but no distance can sever the thread that binds me to Wrexham Hollow. The stars wheel above, and their patterns are no longer random. They are a map, a summons, a promise. I am not the last. The Hollow ones are many, and their hunger is eternal. They are the echo of what made us, and we are but vessels, waiting to be filled.